Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into some fascinating and sometimes, frankly, pretty wild narratives that are circulating online.
Yeah, these are about ongoing legal matters, public perceptions, specific allegations. A lot going on.
Exactly. We've seen these discussions popping up, trying to frame things, dissect what's happening.
So our mission today is to really unpack some of those common talking points we've observed. See what actually emerges when you look closely.
Absolutely. It's a deep dive into how complex stuff gets debated online. Sometimes accurately, sometimes, well, maybe less so. We're going to pull directly from the key themes, the arguments we've seen, to help you understand the different viewpoints being pushed out there.
Okay, let's get into it.
All right. So one point that keeps coming up is this question about why one party, the plaintiff, let's call her she, why wouldn't she want an investigation if she's telling the truth? It's often framed as a kind of gotcha.
Right, it sounds logical on the surface, doesn't it? Like, what do you have to hide?
But when you actually dig into the context here, that argument seems to, well, fundamentally miss what investigation is even being talked about.
Exactly. The key isn't an investigation in general. It's that specific investigation, the internal one by Wayfarer, right?
That's the one that keeps getting mentioned.
Yeah, and the critiques of that argument often call that specific investigation a sham. That's the word used.
No sham. Well,
Because it's seen as, lacking independence. Maybe designed more for PR damage control than actually finding the truth.
okay. So the point is, not wanting that particular investigation doesn't automatically mean you don't want truth or justice. It's about the specifics.
Precisely. It also seems like understanding the actual legal documents is pretty key here, which maybe not everyone commenting is doing.
And there's also chatter about the court process itself. Something about Judge Lemon's ruling.
Yeah, some interpretations are wondering why it's taking a while. Speculating maybe it involves things like alleged witness tampering or maybe non-compliance with discovery requests.
Wow, those are serious claims.
They are serious accusations, absolutely. And they probably reflect a desire people have for things to just move faster, get resolved.
But legal stuff, especially complex cases, they can just take time, right? For reasons that have nothing to do with anything shady.
Absolutely. Discovery itself can be a really long, painstaking process. It doesn't necessarily mean anything nefarious is happening just because it's not instant.
Okay, so switching gears a bit, here's where things seem to take a really sharp turn in some of these online discussions. There's this strong push to frame the whole situation through race and identity.
Yeah, we've definitely observed commentary trying to boil it all down to white women's tears.
Right, framing it explicitly as a racial issue, using terms like white feminism.
And connected to that, there are these, noticeable attempts to portray Justin Baldoni as a minority figure.
How so?
We saw discussions really highlighting his conversion to the Baha'i faith, and specifically focusing on the difference between, converting versus being born into a minority identity.
As if that distinction somehow changes the equation, or undermines her claims, or bolsters his in some racial context.
That seems to be the implication in some corners. It feels like specific identity markers are being kind of picked up and used strategically, depending on the narrative someone wants to push.
And what's also striking is this shift in focus we've seen onto Heath, Baldoni's business partner.
Right. Even though when you look at the allegations themselves, most seem focused on Baldoni.
But some commentary is really putting Heath in the forefront, as the observation goes.
And there's an interpretation floating around that this is being done deliberately, to use Heath as a, quote, token POC to victimize.
Wow, that's quite a framing.
It gets even more intense. In a particularly, jarring example of how heated these identity arguments can get, we've observed a comparison actually being made to Emmett Till in some commentary.
Wait, Emmett Till? Seriously?
Seriously. Just presenting that comparison neutrally as a point that was raised, it just shows you the kind of extreme rhetorical strategies being employed.
Yeah. And there's even an anecdote going around about someone being told they sounded like Carolyn Bryant.
Yeah, the woman whose accusation led to Till's murder. Apparently, just for questioning Baldoni's minority status based on the conversion point, it really underscores how volatile and sensitive these conversations are.
It feels like walking on eggshells sometimes.
What's also fascinating is this parallel people are drawing. They're comparing these tactics to things perceived in the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case.
Okay. I remember some of that, like the claims about fictional Native American ancestry, or attempts to frame things racially there, too.
Exactly. And the point being made is that just like those claims about Depp, lacked solid proof beyond maybe his own statements or casting choices like Lone Ranger or that controversial Sauvage ad.
Right.
These current identity arguments feel similarly constructed, like they're built more for rhetorical effect than based on, solid ground.
It really makes you think about the strategic use of identity claims in these kinds of public disputes.
Definitely. And just to add another layer of weirdness to the online space, some of the commentary we've seen just reads Strangely, like it feels almost like it could have been generated by AI.
Huh. That's a whole other level. Okay, so moving away from the identity stuff, there are completely different narratives emerging too, like these claims involving Taylor Swift.
Oh yeah, this one's pretty specific. There's a point circulating that suggests Taylor Swift has, quote, 100% cooperated with JB and is on his side now.
100% cooperated. That sounds definitive. And what's the proof for this supposed cooperation?
It's linked to the new lawyer who joined Baldoni's team, Ellen Garofalo. The claim is basically that because Garofalo worked at Venable years ago, and Venable was the former firm of Swift's own lawyer, well, that equals proof of cooperation.
Wait, that's the connection? Someone worked at the same firm years ago.
That seems to be the crux of it. And honestly, when you look at that closely, it just feels like pure conspiracy theory territory.
Yeah, that seems like a big leap.
It really doesn't seem grounded in reality, especially when you consider Taylor Swift's very public, very contentious history with Scooter Braun.
Right, the whole Masters dispute. And Baldoni was associated with Braun during that time, wasn't he?
He was seen as being on Braun's side, yeah. So the idea that Swift would suddenly cooperate with someone aligned with Braun just seems highly improbable, let's put it that way.
And the timeline they offer as proof, does that even hold up?
Not really. Based on the analysis we've seen, Garofalo's career history is laid out.
Yeah.
Years at a firm called Liner, then a brief time at Venable after Liner merged into a bigger firm, DLA Piper. Then she went to Carlton Fields and only recently came back to Liner Friedman.
So the Venable connection was brief and indirect through a merger.
And crucially, the analysis states she has never worked with Taylor Swift or her lead attorney, Bill Baldridge. That Venable connection was tangential at best, and years ago.
It really does sound like a classic example of twisting a tiny, tenuous connection into some kind of definitive proof online. Happens all the time.
Absolutely. And related to this, there's also this observation that Taylor Swift is getting a lot of good press right now. And some online talk tries to link that to this legal case.
But isn't she just getting good press because, well, she's Taylor Swift? And she's got massive career stuff happening, like re-recording her album.
Exactly. As the analysis we saw put it, pretty bluntly, she's Taylor fucking Swift. Her own fame and career moves drive headlines, not this specific legal case she's not even involved in.
Makes sense. And what about that headline claiming Swifties are boycotting Blake Lively's brand? Is that actually happening?
The analysis suggests that's completely unsupported by what Swifties are actually talking about online.
Okay, so what are they talking about?
Overwhelmingly, Taylor's music, her career, the Eras tour, things like that, they generally seem supportive of Blake, actually. And there's virtually zero evidence of any organized boycott being discussed among them. Sounds like another manufactured narrative.
Okay, let's pivot now. It seems there are also some pretty significant misunderstandings of the legal system itself playing out in these online discussions.
Yes, that's definitely a theme. One claim we saw that was, frankly, quite surprising is that amicus briefs can't be partisan.
Can't be partisan. For anyone who knows even a little bit about legal procedure, that's just not right, is it?
Not at all. An amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, is literally filed by outside parties who have a specific interest or perspective they want to share with the court. Often that perspective is absolutely in support of one side or the other. That's kind of the point.
Right. And what's even more striking, maybe, is the observation that in some online spaces, the idea that amicus briefs should be outlawed altogether is apparently getting high agreement.
Yeah, that suggests a really profound disconnect from how the U.S. legal system actually functions. Amicus briefs are a long-standing part of the process.
Honestly, some of these points about legal procedure, they kind of make it clear that maybe a basic understanding of U.S. civics is missing for some of the people commenting.
It seems that way sometimes. And it gets even more technical when you look at the arguments around California's AB 933 law, specifically Section 47.1.
Okay, what's the claim there?
The claim being pushed is that this law is unconstitutional, that it somehow denies due process to the accused party.
Due process. Okay. But when you unpack that argument, what's really going on?
Well, it seems that people talking about due process might have a very specific, maybe inaccurate idea of what it guarantees. Like maybe assuming it grants an automatic right to discovery in all situations.
Which isn't necessarily true.
Right. Analysis suggests the actual legal argument being made in court isn't primarily about due process anyway. It's more focused on the First Amendment right to petition the government, which is a related but distinct legal concept.
So due process guarantees things like fairness, notice, a chance to be heard, but not automatically specific discovery tools in every single context.
That's a good way to put it. There's also debate around the without malice requirement in that law. Some commentary seems to think malice needs to be proven right at the beginning.
But that doesn't sound right for an early stage pleading, does it?
No. The legal interpretation presented is that without malice likely means malice has to be pled properly in the legal complaint. You have to state it as an alleged fact.
But you don't have to prove it with evidence at that very first step before discovery or anything.
Exactly. Proving it comes later. Pleading is just the initial assertion in the documents.
So if the constitutional arguments about due process or malice aren't quite hitting the mark, what's the real frustration here, do you think?
According to some analysis, it might actually be the penalty the law allows. That treble costs and damages part.
Triple the costs and damages. That could be seen as potentially really onerous, really high stakes.
That seems to be a core concern, maybe more so than the strict constitutional legality itself.
It just highlights again how complex legal details can get twisted or lost when they hit the public online debate sphere.
Definitely. And there was even this anecdote about moderators in one online space apparently removing comments that tried to explain due process correctly because they weren't considered civil enough. Which, says a lot about the nature of those discussions if explaining basic legal concepts gets shut down.
Yeah, that's telling. We also saw some confusion noted about why, say, claims for emotional damages might get dismissed in a case, but the lawsuit itself could still move forward.
Right. Again, that probably reflects a misunderstanding. Different parts or claims within a single lawsuit can be treated separately by the court. Dismissing one part doesn't automatically end the whole thing.
Okay, another theme that seemed to pop up involved some pretty big claims about financial control, like who is supposedly on the payroll.
Oh, yeah. We saw points being made that specific entities are under Blake's payroll, and the list was, well, pretty wide-ranging.
Like what?
It included claims about former President Trump,
Okay.
various equal rights advocate groups, and even the original authors of that AB 933 law we were just talking about.
Wow. It's like a diverse group supposedly being paid off.
The specific claim about Blake, Ryan, and her attorneys buying Trump was highlighted as particularly striking. It seems to reflect this almost like exaggerated perception of power being attributed to them. It's a huge leap.
Yeah, buying Trump is a bold claim. And there was also an interesting observation about a perceived contradiction in some of the commentary.
Yes. People apparently idolizing figures like Candace Owens,
Okay.
while also being really upset that Blake's lawyer's firm had previously settled some litigation with Trump.
Huh. So supporting Owens but angry about a law firm settling with Trump.
Exactly. It suggests this sort of underlying political tension or maybe inconsistency woven into how people react.
Fascinating. Okay, shifting from entities to individuals, we also noted a lot of discussion focused on Elyse Dorsey, one of the accusers.
Yes, and unfortunately, it involved a fair amount of personal attacks and attempts to really discredit her credibility.
That feels like a common and pretty ugly tactic sometimes.
It really is. We saw efforts pushing back against this, calling it an ugly narrative, and pointing people towards external reporting, like a Wall Street Journal profile or a Bloomberg article.
To provide more context.
Yeah, articles that apparently give more background on her alleged abuser and mention other accusers, too. Trying to counter the narrative, provide facts.
The view expressed in the pushback was pretty strong, wasn't it?
Very. Basically saying it's disgusting what's being said about her, and that this whole tactic of attacking and discrediting victims or advocacy groups just to help one side's defense in court is deeply problematic.
It definitely highlights how the online debate can spill way beyond the legal facts and get very personal very quickly.
Absolutely.
Okay, finally, let's look at how the actual case strategy itself and things like new lawyers joining are being interpreted online.
Right. So one idea circulating is that because things seem quieter in mainstream media, and maybe in certain online communities focused on PR, that must mean Brian Friedman, Baldoni's lawyer, is getting ready to drop something big, like some bombshell revelation is coming.
But is that the only explanation for things being quiet?
Not at all. A much more straightforward and frankly more likely explanation based on legal process is simply that the case is in the discovery phase.
And discovery happens mostly behind the scenes, right? Confidentially.
Yeah, exactly. So less public-facing activity is totally normal during discovery. It doesn't automatically signal some dramatic reveal is imminent.
Okay, that makes sense. Then there's the whole topic of the new attorney, Ellen Garofalo, joining Friedman's firm and showing up on the case docket.
Yes. And we've seen what some analysis calls standing of this new attorney, like a lot of positive focus on her. And naturally, different interpretations of what her joining actually means.
Okay, so what's one interpretation?
One take is that adding her means Wayfair, Baldoni's company, is definitely rejecting Lively's desperate attempts to settle. That's the framing. Adding a strong litigator means they're digging in for a fight.
Rejecting settlement attempts. Okay, what's the counter-interpretation?
The counter, and maybe a more strategically grounded view, is that Wayfair is finally acknowledging that the plaintiff, Lively, is not going to just settle easily, that this case is actually going to trial.
So not rejecting settlement, but preparing for the reality that settlement might not happen.
Exactly. And so adding a litigator like Garofalo, who apparently has a solid trial record, isn't about rejecting settlement talks per se, but it's a necessary step, maybe even taken far too late, some suggest, to actually prepare for a trial.
And the analysis of Garofalo herself, what's the take on her qualifications?
It seems positive. Points to her being a genuine litigator, having solid trial wins on her record. And some commentary also noted it positively that a female attorney is being uplifted in this high-profile role.
Interesting. Was there also speculation about what this means for Friedman himself?
Yeah, a little bit. Some discussion wondered if the spotlight shifting to Garofalo might signal that Friedman is maybe stepping back a bit, or perhaps perceived as less effective now the trial seems likely.
But is that likely? Would he step back willingly?
The analysis seems skeptical that he'd do that voluntarily, but it's the kind of speculation that pops up online when team dynamics shift even slightly. It's reading tea leaves, maybe.
And just circling back quickly to the plaintiff's stance, was that interpretation of her Time 100 speech?
Right. The quote, "Never underestimate how much pain a woman can endure." Some commentary read that not just as a general statement, but as a very deliberate message.
A message about this case.
Yeah, like signaling her intention to fight this hard, all the way to court if necessary, that she wouldn't back down easily.
And one last point about the online discussion itself.
Just that some attention seems to be shifting to more private online groups, like Discord servers, things like that, which could also be a reason why discussion on broader, more public forums might seem a bit quieter at times.
Right, the conversation moves channels. Okay, so stepping back from all these individual points, what does this whole deep dive into these specific online discussions really reveal about how complex issues, especially ones with legal angles and intense personal dimensions, get debated and maybe distorted online?
Well, it certainly highlights the sheer volume of conflicting narratives out there, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the tendency for people to interpret everything through their preferred lens, whether that's ideological or identity-based.
And the huge challenge, really, for anyone trying to follow along, to sort out the actual factual legal realities from just speculation or maybe even strategically constructed arguments designed to sway opinion.
We've definitely covered a lot of ground, from really specific legal interpretations and case strategy talk.
All the way to these broad claims about identity politics, financial influence, who's paying who, the dynamics of online communities.
It's a fascinating, sometimes really messy, picture of public perception crashing into a private legal process.
And it shows just how easily misinformation, or even just highly selective information, can take root and spread when it's filtered through strong opinions and, maybe pre-existing viewpoints.
Yeah. So maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to ponder as you navigate these kinds of online spaces. How do we evaluate the information we come across when different groups are actively pushing competing interpretations, especially when emotions are running so high, like in a legal case?
That's a tough question. How can we get better at distinguishing between something presented as a legal fact, something that's clearly just personal opinion or speculation, and maybe something that's part of a deliberate narrative being spun for strategic reasons?
It really requires a critical eye, doesn't it? And maybe a willingness to question the easy answers or the loudest voices.
Definitely something to think about.